very much for honoring us this afternoon to join us for the book discussion, Bless Me Father by Marion de Offizi. I'll now hand over to Rose Francis to introduce the guest to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Theodora. Good evening. My name is Rose Francis. I am the CEO of African Perspectives Publishing. And the book that we're going to be talking about today, I am the distributor for that particular book. And that is called, the book is called Bless Me Father by Marion de Offizi. Before we start, I'd like to thank and welcome Dr. Rukaya Bauer, who's the Executive Director of UJ Library. Thank you very much for hosting us. Theodora Modisi, who's Head of Events at UJ Library, and Reneke Pandey, also from UJ Library. Thank you for hosting us today. I'd also like to introduce Dr. Raphael de Abdon, who will be discussing the aspects of the book with Mario. And I just wanted to say that Dr. Raphael de Abdon, he moved to South Africa from Italy in 2007. He is a lecturer at UNISA. He's a writer, poet, and translator. Thank you, Dr. Raphael de Abdon. Karabo Kholeng is an African art journalist and ambassador who gives creative work a public life by using writing, public speaking, and audio broadcast. Some of you will know her from the radio station SAFM, the literature show. She believes passionately that the artist's creation is the story, and she delivers it to a wide range of audiences with notable success. Karabo is well regarded in the field, having created her own niche in the promotion of literature, music, and visual art, and is the recipient of various prestigious awards and accolades, including the South African Literary Award for Journalism. Insight, authenticity, wit, and compassion are the mottos that she lives by. Allow Karabo Kholeng to tell her story. Thank you for joining us. Now, I'm not going to describe the book. I think you're going to have a good hour of hearing Karabo and Raphael and Mario talk about the book. But I just want to say thank you very much for attending this session. The book, Bless Me Father, you will find today after the session. It will be on sale. It sells for 180 Rand. It's also available, excuse me, online on African Perspectives website, and of course at exclusive bookstores throughout the country. Thank you very much and enjoy the evening.
Thank you, Rose, and thank you all for coming and gracing this auspicious event. I'm very happy to see you all, and I'm honored to be speaking to Mario because I only met you on the phone all those years ago, and it's always a pleasure to be sharing this stage with you, Raphael. Now, Bless Me Father is an epic book, by no stretch of the imagination. For me, it is a story about, well, fatherhood and love and conflicts and the stories that come out from the interactions between three generations of men. And I say three because I'm thinking particularly about Mario's sons, because you do write about them in your book. I also think that it's a pertinent story when we speak about masculinity in the world. Because with the kinds of discussions that are opening up about the questions of gender, I think it's really important to have another look at the way that masculinity is presented and represented in stories that span different generations. In addition to that, the themes that stand out for me in this book, and Raphael, you can agree or disagree with me, in addition to fatherhood, it talks about conflict, love in its various states, be it familial love, romantic love, and the love between friends. It also speaks about loss, domestic violence, And for me as well, the issue of alcoholism, I think it's something that's not mentioned in our society. From a historical perspective, in literature and in the arts, it's usually spoken of with a kind of romance. Like if you think about some of the great writers of the 50s, I'm thinking of Can Temba, a lot of them met an early end because of alcohol. So I think about that a lot when I read this book. But overall, it's about telling one hell of a story. And Mario does this with a kind of humor that is difficult to come by. So again, thank you, Mario, for such a remarkable piece of work. And Raphael, over to you.
Thank you, Karabo. It's once again a pleasure to share the room, the event with you. And once again, how many times have we done that, Mario, together? Quite a few, but every time is special for me. And thanks to you, to the organizers, and to all these young faces that I see here. I'm very surprised, very excited. We've done many presentations, but I've never seen so many young faces to our presentation, so I'm very happy about it. This is a new audience for us, and I hope that Mario's story will inspire you as much as it inspired me when I first came across it, which was in 2008, when the book was launched. And to respond to Karabo, yes, I do agree with you. All the things that you have mentioned are in the book, particularly fatherhood is one of the central themes of the book. The book presents these two towering father figures in Mario's life that probably Mario will discuss later on with us. And on top of that is a book about memory, because it's an autobiography. So like any other autobiographical text, is an exercise on memory. And in particular, this book, and I will deal in detail about it, with that, is a book of that sprang out of a particular kind of memory, which is traumatic memory, because it's a book about trauma and survival as well. So I guess Mario probably will start to engage with us by reading something or by just introducing himself, and then we can start the conversation. There will be many topics, many aspects of this book that we can discuss together. And I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, but I guess the event is open for questions at any time. So
Yes, indeed it is.
we would like to engage with you.
Am I correct? Okay, yes. Just to give you a brief overview of how this conversation is going to unfold.
Thank you. Can you hear me? I'm actually very honored to be here. And when I heard that Karabo was holding this discussion, she interviewed me in Cape Town. I was sitting in my garden on the cell phone, and she was in her studio. And every now and again said, "Don't let go, it's an ad break." I know that. I worked in advertising for 25 years. You've got to live with it. But one of the things I said to Rose, are there going to be young people? This is not Rand Afrikaans University. This is different. She said yes, and I said, well, then I'm willing to come, because that's really who I relate to, because I've got my own, and I was once one. But you used the word auspicious. She used the word, when people talk about my book, I said, it's very simple. Don't be scared of it. There's only one word I use, but you'll know it in context. It's auspicious. I just love the word. So that's as simple as that. Karabo asked me to talk briefly about why I wrote the book. There was no why I wrote it. I'm from a very young child growing up in Nazareth House in Kimberley, and having straight from there on the production line of so-called problem children, who not really, they had problem parents. You go from the one to the other. I wanted to be nothing more than a published writer, poet, that's all. I had ADD, there was no ways I could write more than 2,000 words. But when I went into the DRC with a conflict journalist, I had my own little agency with my son Paul, and he left in 2006 to New Zealand with my grandchildren. And I met this conflict Irishman on the train, and he had read a short story I wrote about Angola, a satirical piece, not talking blood and guts, but what the were we doing there kind of story. And he liked it, and he said he's going to the DRC, would I like to come with him? And I said, yeah, and we had 3 meetings, and I told my wife, she said, you got 5 grandchildren, you got 4 kids, you're going with a stranger into a war zone, are you mad? I said, well, Paul's going overseas, we don't have a little agency left anymore, so I did. And it was that, when I got back, and we were smuggled out, that said to me, you got to put your shit down. Sorry, I promise I wouldn't use that word, but you got to put your stuff down now. And that started, but first I wrote the Congo story, which was, if the book is 80, 100,000, 60,000 was getting in, smuggling cameras in, how we were treated and getting smuggled out. And then it evolved where every time I saw young orphans, I think of Nazareth House. When I saw delinquents, I thought about Boys Town where I was. When I saw the military, well, I was in the army, we were all conscripted, and I was in Angola. And so I wrote about that kind of background. So it's like stories within stories. Journeys within journeys, and starts with the Congo, ends with the Congo. It's not I was born, grew up, went to, did this, sitting back. No, it starts and it ends with that framework. And as I never knew there existed anything called trauma narratives, and he told me the other day. So yeah, I just wrote because I needed to write. So I grew up as not an orphan, but I lived in an orphanage. I couldn't spell the word tolerance, but I knew it from a very young age. Because when you're living in a dormitory with 20 other kids and you come from holiday and you're crying for mommy, then you hold a minute and you say, the lighty, the lad next door doesn't have a mommy, so what are you actually crying about? It's all relative, but still, it just led me to balance out. So it's about, it goes back, it goes forward, it goes back, it stays in the Congo. There was a chapter which was about the molestation that I endured through the founder of Boys Town. People say, why did I write about it? I had to write it down. The Congo, it was something I had to do. I'd spoken to my doctor and he said, you better write this, if you don't, I will. That was a long time. I also worked on the TLC. My son and I actually did the concept. He phoned me the night before I was freelancing, and he was a creative director of an ad agency, the Herd Boys, the first really, truly black-owned agency before 91. But they had started from Ogilvy. And he's phoned me and he said, Dad, I've got a problem. He said, we're presenting to Bishop Tutu, and he's cried. Tomorrow morning at the agency, all we got is logo designs, but we got no words. So what you're paying? He said, they've got 1,000 rand. I said, no ways, for a concept. Then I thought about it, he said, please, Dave, we had a few young writers, but all they want to do is win awards. They don't actually understand what the dynamics of this TRC is about. So I said, okay, I'll settle with 1,000 rand, but bring 4 cold castles, come to my house. And we started to write. And we started to, like we do, there's no egos, I'm the writer, you're the art director. That's how we were successful, we could work together. He's like 45 this year, so I had him young, I was 20 when he was born. So I came up with the Road to Reconciliation, Truth, that's TRC, almost an acronym. And then I wrote a line that said, the truth hurts, but silence kills. And that started me thinking about my own complicity in the silence. He wrote a wonderful line that said, don't let our nightmares become our children's. And it was bought by the Arch, and it was on posters all over, and it was, I got my 1,000 rand and 6 cold beers we shared. But that's just, that also was, that was the writing, but not the writing. That was when it started, but it wasn't, I'm going to write a book about it. Only after the Congo, I thought, no, I've got to put this down. My greatest mentors, and I'd like to make this very clear, and I'm horrified that when I speak to a lot of young students and I ask them, have you ever heard of Joseph Oswald Machali? How many of you have ever heard of Machali? Probably the greatest Zulu poet I've ever read, Oswald. I was 21 when my ex-English teacher, I was working in a clothing shop. He sent the book, Sounds of a Car Drum, and it moved me. And I wrote a poem called Oswald Machali, and I sent it to him. And he sent it to Machali. Machali was about 36, 37. I was going 22. And they were having Symposium 22, 72. And there was Guy Butler, David Livingston, Sidney Clark, Wally Siroti, Machali, and there were 10 of them. And Oswald spoke to the committee and said that they wanted to invite me on the last night to read as a guest poet. And that was at 22, that was like huge, coming from the man I worship, because he was really the first tangible poetry. It wasn't like, screw you, screw that. It was just so beautifully and simply, almost no bitterness. You had to search for the bitterness in there. It was so beautifully done. And I read, and we became friends. And he went overseas to some university. And then when I was about 35, I met him at the Market Theatre. He was reading, I read in the paper. And we rekindled the friendship, and I said to him, this is a funny story. I didn't put it in there because he could have still been alive, but I'll tell it now because he is, and I must contact him.
But Mario, Rose is going to fire us
Why?
because you're telling your whole story.
Oh, okay.
You're spoiling it for the kids.
Okay. Well, I didn't write about this, but then I said, come for a Brian. Yeah, no, he came with 12 nurses from Paraguanas to my place in Orchards I was looking after, and we had a party, and then he left. I haven't seen him since. So the book is, it's about a childhood, my siblings all died young, suicide, beaten up, aspiration, and I'm sort of one of the survivors, and I think it's like a bitterness, as I always say. And also my kids, I've always said to them, and I mentioned in my book, my brother died from drugs. He took a drug overdose and killed himself. And I always say bitterness and anger are like hot coals. When you're ready to throw them, it's too late because you don't know where to throw them and they're going to burn you. You can't get rid of them because they're stuck to you. So that's the feeling that it permeates through the book. It's just, don't need all the anger and that crap. Just like tell a story.
I think that's plenty of inspiration. Thank you for that. Round of applause. Raphael.
Well, I don't want to talk about the book because, as you can see, Mario can do it very well himself. What I can say is that I can tell you the story of how I got engaged with Mario, and it wasn't through this book. Originally, I met Mario as a poet. I was collecting an anthology of South African spoken word poetry in 2007 that I wanted to translate into Italian. So I organized a few events here in Newtown to just meet the poets, talk about the project, and invite them to submit. So I started to collect this poetry, and my inbox started being flooded by poems by mostly young Black writers, just like you, your age, 20 years old or so. And then all of a sudden, I find in my inbox the picture of this middle-aged man, white man, with an Italian name on top. And I was very surprised. I was asking myself, what is he doing here? What does he want from me? He wants me to publish his stuff? And then I read his poems, and I was so touched that I wrote to him, and I said, I want to publish these poems. And I put him in this anthology together with this bunch of young Black kids. And since then, I started to wanted to read more about Mario. And fortunately, maybe a year later, came this book. And that gave me the opportunity to meet Mario in person. We had only communicated via emails until then. And the book was launched here in Johannesburg at the Unity Gallery. And I bought the book and I read it overnight. And it was so inspirational that I promised myself that I wanted to translate the book into Italian, which I did. And in 2011, together with another colleague, with a scholar and poet from Italy, Lorenzo Mari, we translated Mario's book. And we had Mario invited to one of the most prestigious festivals in Italy, and we launched the book there. And on top of that, we had a tour in Italy. We touched different cities where we launched the book, including the city of Palestrina, which is the city where Mario's father, came from. Again, he will talk probably more about it, but Mario's father was a prisoner of war in the prison camp of Zondervater, just outside Pretoria, which was the prison camp where Italian prisoners of war were kept during World War II. And my grandfather was also one of those prisoners, and probably they share the table together at some point. So Mario's father stayed here like many Italian prisoner, and he started a new life in South Africa, and then the rest of the story is in the book. So what I'm trying to say is that I've engaged with Mario at different levels, as a poet, as a translator, and now I'm currently engaging with Mario's writing as a scholar. I've been writing this article for over 2 years now, trying to articulate this idea that Mario's book is, as he said, a trauma narrative. So it's a multi-layered book. It's a big story that contains many micro stories, and so it's like a puzzle of different situations. And it's particularly inspirational because, once again, it's a story about survival, and we know how traumatized South African society is. And you want to speak about sexual violence, sexual abuse. He went through it. You want to speak about he lost a child, he's lost brothers and sisters. He survived so many situations that, unfortunately, the average South African goes through in his everyday life, that if someone reads this book, will really find some source of inspiration, and you will find courage, because to see Mario surviving and going through all these experiences and surviving and being here, beautiful, fresh, still able to write beautiful stuff, it's really a nice story to be exposed to. So one of the other things that struck me from this book is that I could relate to it, even though I was born in Italy and I grew up in Italy, basically one generation after Mario. And Mario grew up here. The situations that he was living and he was telling about in the book were more or less similar to the one I lived when I was a teenager or when I was growing up. So I think that many people can relate to Mario's story at many different levels. That's why for me it's a very, very interesting book. Apart from being very well written, it's a book penned by a poet. It's a poet who writes in prose. So I can only recommend this book, and I'm sure that Mario will give you more reason to be interested in it.
Thank you, Raphael.
Thank you, Raphael.
Okay, let's get into it. Do you want to start with your questions?
Fine.
Yes, let the scholar go first.
I'm a gentleman.
Let me start with this particular aspect of the book. As I say, I'm writing this article, and when I was doing research on memory and writing and trauma and writing, I found out that in the field of psychology, there is this process called restitution ad integrum, which basically means restitution all at once. And it's a process that I will write a little excerpt for you, and then explain a little bit further. And this process is the psychological process that started the writing process of Mario. Just to explain it to you in accurate term, it's about traumatic memory. Traumatic memory is evoked under particular conditions. It occurs automatically in situations which are reminiscent of the original traumatic situation. These circumstances trigger the traumatic memory, which is produced by this mechanism called restitution ad integrum. When one element of the traumatic experience is evoked, all other elements follow automatically. Ordinary memory is not characterized by restitution ad integrum. So this type of memory, traumatic memory, works differently from regular ordinary memory. So basically what happens when you suffer a trauma and you don't deal with it, your brain, in order to protect you, it's a mechanism of self-defense, stores this traumatic memory in a part of the brain where it keeps that memory away from your ordinary life. But if in your daily life you happen to live a situation or experience a situation that triggers that particular traumatic memory that your brain is trying to hide from you, then the trauma comes back, and it comes very violently, and all the suffering resurfaces. So this is what happened with Mario, and he speaks about it in the book, that traumas that he suffered as a child came afloat again after his trip in Congo. And I want to stop here. I would like Mario to engage with this. Talk first about your traumatic experiences in your boyhood, particularly the one at the boys' school, and then how this traumatic memory came back to you after the trip of Congo, and how that triggered your need to write about it, to write your story.
I'll say it in my own way because it's very academic, but can you hear me? With no disrespect, but it was simply about something that had to be written. Yeah, it was tough at Nazareth House in Kimberley, and I wasn't the only one, as I said, because we all went through this treadmill. It was a time of bullying. It was a time of you don't tell the nuns this happened, because if you did, you got attacked at night and you didn't know who did it. And so that was a difficult place. It was an old age home and a children's home at the same time. And being a Catholic altar boy, I reckon I must have gone to at least one funeral a week, either in our chapel or in Kimberley as hired guns. And then the following Saturday, a wedding. And so we standing around swinging the incense, and you're looking at old ladies and old men and young bodies. And, you know, at 7, 8, 9 years of age, this is like hectic. So you've got to keep it in, and it slowly builds. And you learn to survive in that, where you're all in the same boat. And if you don't respect each other and you don't work together, then you might as well just give up then. And so it went on to Boys Town. And I did very well at Boys Town. I'd accepted, having been at Nazareth House, that you either live with the system, you obey the rules, and I became mayor of Boys Town eventually, an ambassador to the Lady Oppenheimer, to her farm, where she actually had a farm. She converted to Catholicism and built a little chapel on her farm, Bluebird, near Boys Town. She, in fact, funded a lot of Boys Town. The one building is called the Oppenheimer Wing. We helped build it. We had to go up the mountain and carry rocks down when I first started there. So we watched it grow. And then I was at the age of like 13, 14. I don't want to give it to you, but the process of molestation started by the man who founded it, and bless his soul, as I put quite clearly in my book, and I say to a lot of people, without Boys Town, I wouldn't have been the person I am, both for the good and bad reasons, because I was given incredible foundation in terms of working with other people, in terms of paying attention to academia, although they threw me out of literature class and maths and science because I refused. There was a point where I would yes or no, and that was a point. Don't subscribe to me or prescribe to me. And I looked around and I thought, I'm not Brad Pitt. I'm not the only one here. Nobody ever spoke about it. Nobody ever mentioned it. If I had to say this happened, they'd call me a homo or a gay. And if you go tell the nuns, they'll send you to Takai Reformatory. If I told my father he was a Catholic, he would have beaten the shit out of me. So I kept quiet. And then only when I married my third wife, when I met her, I started talking about it, because then you start worrying, are you gay? And then I had this tendency to chat the ladies up, and people started using these horrible terms like womanizer. And basically, yes, but when I look back, I was saying, I was just trying to prove a point maybe. No excuse, good excuse if you're actually doing it for that reason. But and so it just went on. Married, divorced, but I was married 3 times. My wife passed away about 20 months ago after 37 years. The first one 2 years, the next one 5 years, 2 boys, a girl and another girl. And
Sorry, who passed away? Was it Carla?
Carla.
Oh, my condolences. You do make friends with all of Mario's people in this book.
Can Gran you liked the most?
I loved Can Gran.
She was my mother. The kids called her Can Gran. At 80, she still drank a 2-liter semi-sweet white wine and smoked a bit of stuff because she said it was better than all the chemicals the doctor was giving her, so she could sleep well. And then she had a stroke at 81. She had a toy boy of 20 years or younger, her junior, and I was still Southampton sailor. I said, Can Gran, how can you be with a toy boy? You're 80. She said, the factory might be closed, but the playground's still open. I thought, I got no worries, no Viagra for the future, just think about it. So I had that colorful, which took away the grayness, so it became interesting. And I just, okay, I suffered. I've been on anti-anxiety tablets for the last 18 years. Thanks to my son in New Zealand, I spent 3 months. the doctors were saying to me, "You've got to go into rehab for at least 6 weeks, and under supervision, and replace the drugs." And my elder son, 45, Paul, we had our own agency together. He's creative director of a big agency in New Zealand. He's an art director, I was a writer. And he said, "Dad, do you have to go through that crap? Do it on your own." And he was my sole therapist with the grandchildren. And touch wood, I only have a little bit at night. And doctors say, "How did you do it? You can have a seizure." I said, "Well, I didn't have a seizure, did I?" So maybe it's delayed. But so the effects were difficult. Like, I've got a problem when you see me shuffling. It's not because I've drunk too much alcohol. I've only there's one vodka in that water, and that's just to calm me. But the feet, I've got what they call peripheral neuropathy. And I saw a specialist, and he said immediately, the first thing they do for that condition is test for diabetes. And he told me, I'm not quoting the textbooks, he told me that 95% of all people have sugar. And the other 5%, like me, have compounded trauma and shock, and added and aggravated by a little bit of alcohol and cigarettes. And which is true. So I've had to cut down on the stuff to stay alive and actually live for the grandchildren. There was an edge. There was a time when I said, I want to, especially after Carla went, I want to go. That's not in the book because it happened afterwards. So all this is recent, but you live with this, and people say, it was cathartic writing the book. Yeah, I got it out into print. But all I can say now, if I say another word, not another word, I want to say this. When the book was published, I started through my publisher getting emails from up to 12 old boys from as far afield as Australia, Canada, Italy. And the gist of every one of the emails, half of them were anonymous. The other ones were, Marion, do you remember me? Thank you, this is the gist, for taking a huge burden off my shoulders. Thank you. I can now talk to my wife and my children and my family. I went through exactly the same time, same place, same modus operandi. You're 13, have a double vodka before you can do anything. I just used to walk in and help myself. I loved Drambuie after that. I mean, so I say no more. Well, I helped. For me, that if I didn't sell a thing, it was these people felt they were not burdened anymore. And then I've done my dues. Or paid them, sorry, bad English.
Okay, well, you sound like quite a resilient person, and I don't know whether you're going to say anything about resilience and having overcome trauma. I'm not sure what actually contributes to some people being more resilient than others.
I have no idea.
Well, what I learned from Mario, and it's clear from the way he writes as well, is that there's no space in him for victimization or self-commiseration or judgment. Is a man who always looks, beyond what has happened to him in the past, and he looks forward. And that also is very inspiring for me, because it teaches you a lesson that you don't have to get stuck in some place of fear and pain in the past, but you have to move forward. And if he has done it, going through all these different stages of pain, of suffering, of loss, and coming out of those different phases victorious, it's really inspirational, So you could speak about, sexual abuse or alcoholism or violence, but the bottom line is that every time Mario found a way to move forward and to deal with that traumatic part of his life, and that's resilience. That's resilience. And
can I add just one thing? It's something I didn't put there, but something I've been thinking about recently. You can hear me. Is people will say, you got a background I'm not envious about. Hello, yeah, sure. Doesn't matter. If you grow up in a normal home, you have role models, your parents, and you're taught or inclined to or pressured to think in a certain way. Now, I was unlucky and lucky at the same time, which is, I think, works for resilience. I had 3 or 4 surrogate fathers, including 2 black fathers, like Father Patrick, who politicized me. He was at Boys Town. He used to teach us. And we used to go to the same mass at Lady Oppenheimer's. And I was 16 and we were plotting the overthrow of the Pretoria government. He politicized me at that young age. He was another father.
Can I stop you and ask you to read that excerpt about your politicization
Half an
through?
hour to find it.
I think I can.
What I'm trying to say is, I had so many conflicting, do this, do that, don't do this. It's equally intelligent people will say this and the other will say that. I learned to think for myself. I learned to take what I could and I tried my best to take the best. So I was lucky. And I didn't have a formal education. They threw me out of matric after the second attempt.
This one only speaks about the teachers.
I don't know if anyone's got their book. It's on page 124, if I'm not mistaken.
No, he's got 130 something. I think you lost.
I think we're
Not
having...
you, him.
Does it, where does it begin?
Because that section is particularly
Okay.
indicative of Marion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So it's
Mine is the old
it's
edition. but
135.
What does it begin? What's the opening line?
The most unusual of all the teachers was Father Patrick.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that is page 124.
So I write about, and this is very short, I write about the teachers. I write about the wealth of knowledge and love I got from the people there. Just that little bit was not right. Anyway, that had to happen. It was meant to happen. The most unusual of all the teachers was Father Patrick, who taught religious studies. Father Patrick was a Masutu priest who primarily ministered to the black people of the St. James Mission. Though he became quite involved with us, alternating with Father Osmond in saying Mass at our chapel. I was at one stage head sacristan, so I got to know him better than most. Like the Afrikaans teacher Kokkie, he too was a firebrand, but for different reasons. He was a short, quiet, and intense man who took life very seriously, though he sometimes showed a sharp sense of humor. One day he walked into the matric class. There were only about 8 of us. Very privileged. Obviously very angry, dumped his books on the desk and turned to the blackboard. He scribbled the word immorality on the blackboard. He turned to us, eyes glowing and almost spitting out his words, shouted, "Tell me the meaning of this word." There was a deathly silence amongst us. Then one of the guys, Leon Mortensen, casually answered, "Sleeping with a black woman," followed by an audible chuckle from somebody else. All hell broke loose. Father Patrick flung the chalk wildly into our midst and, raising his voice just lower than a scream, ordered, "Get out your fucking Oxfords or your Websters or any fucking dictionary you have and look up the word immorality." Almost immediately, calmness overcame him, and looking directly at me, he asked, "What does it say?" I opened my Oxford dictionary and turned to the appropriate page, nervously looking for the word and then reading its definition, "The lowering of model standards, Father." "Thank you," he said. He wiped the word from the blackboard, instructed us to turn to the correct page in one of the religious studies books we had been working through, and continued with the lesson. Not another word was ever said. That was awesome. If you want to just say a little bit more about him, but
Yeah, I think that puts it succinct.
is that
Yeah.
it's succinct?
Yeah, because it also it gives a lot to think about. I mean, I can't imagine what went through your mind when he said, "Okay, that's it, let's get on with our work."
No,
And it'll be interesting to get an idea of what younger readers would think. So I think I'd encourage you to read it and then maybe send your comments through.
He controlled his anger very quickly. He was dealing with us. We were delinquents, remember? So, and he didn't want to. But I used to go with him to Bluebird Farm, and as I said, we used to plot to overthrow the government. But we knew it's not going to happen, but it was a joke. You know, we used to laugh about it and that. So he was very, very, and also if he had been caught at Boys Town, they would have closed Boys Town down. In those days, you couldn't even talk to the so-called garden boy. I'm talking about the 60s here. For goodness sake, when that was at the height of its oppression. And he was a courageous man. In fact, he was so outspoken at his parish after leaving Boys Town. He was at Rosebank. And I heard this many years later, that he was convinced by the bishop and that, go and study in America, because a white congregation were complaining that he was using the pulpit as a political tool. And he disappeared and he went to Harvard or somewhere. Never heard of him again, but it was convenient for them.
Okay, well, that's riveting, Mario. I would like us to move a little bit quicker because I can see the youngsters. We live in a world of 140 characters or less. And for those of you who are here, just to give you an idea of when the 1960s were, it was before TV in South Africa. So just think about it.
10
No
years.
Netflix. Yeah. Your next question or comments, Raphael?
Oh, I didn't have one, but I wanted to relate it to what what you just read now. I think for someone like myself who didn't live apartheid because I wasn't here, and like I think most of you because you're too young, I think that a story like Mario's, you know, what I want to say is that when you read about apartheid in history books, it's a very defined narrative. Like it's clear who's the good and who's the bad and who's right and who's wrong. But especially when you are a white male, you are usually associated with, you know, oppression, etc. And that is reflected also in South African literature. Mario's is the autobiography of a white South African poet, okay? So who do you have in South Africa as white South African poets who are known in the world of literature? On one side, you have Roy Campbell, okay? This unapologetic colonial champion. And on the other side, you have Breiten Breitenbach, the activist who spent years in isolation for being accused of terrorism and basically nothing in between. So, you know, you don't have a nuanced narration of what white poets were experiencing during apartheid. And here comes Mario with this narrative of a white guy from the so-called margins, you know, a guy living, you know, in a world that is white, but is not privileged. And that's, you know, comes out clearly from his narration. It gives you a new dimension of what was living as a white during apartheid, but not as a privileged white. And even in terms of who are the white poets who are canonized in this country, it tells you that there are certain poets that are canonized because they represent certain profiles, and you have this guy that breaks all the categories, that evades, you know, escapes the boxes where people like to put writers in. So this is another very important aspect for me of this book. And, you know, you read stories that for me at least are very inspiring. One of my favorite writers is Charles Bukowski, a writer who writes about being drunk and being in bars and fights and women and all that. And he writes very well, and he writes the kind of stories that for me, you know, takes you close to the man of the street, you know, which is also where I come from, you know. So Mario is a very interesting book for this reason, among many other reasons, because it's an unusual narrative by a white male during apartheid in South Africa. So one more reason to explore the story of this man.
Yeah, you know, I can
and this
relate
poet.
I can relate with the whole idea of the crisis of representation. I think that perhaps a lot of young South Africans who do get an opportunity to sit on a platform like this, particularly as a Black woman, what happens is that you become hyper visible. So you're put in a position, whether you're in collusion with that or not, where suddenly this responsibility is thrust upon yourself. Perhaps it's also something that you said for yourself, that now you have to represent every single kind of Black woman that there is in South Africa, which can be incredibly pressurizing. So I think it's refreshing, and I'd like to be able to tell my story that way. I think it's something that, you know, when you consider writing or telling your story, that you try and stick to your own truth, because it's very easy to sort of fall into that trap where you start talking about representation. Another thing, before we all suffer death by masculinity, I want to talk about the women in your life. I get the sense that your mother is that one individual who kind of, you know, planted the sense of enduring love that you seem to have had throughout your life, and that you feel towards people, you know, regardless of the kind of trauma that, you know, you received at their hands. Can you tell me a little bit more about, you know, the kind of relationship that you had with your mother?
Well, firstly, after 3.5, 4, I probably only saw her for 2 weeks of a year until I left school. But it was so endearing in those 2 weeks because of the character. She was never bitter. And she was a nurse aide, and she slogged night shifts, and she first husband was an alcoholic, and my father met her, and then my father left her and she married another alcoholic, and then he died, but before he died she met another guy, and I saw all of them going there, and the last one wasn't an alcoholic, but she started drinking after the first two. And I mirror something very similar, not with, I did the drinking, but I met my first wife. The secret was I never left one for the other. So when I'd left the first wife, Linda, I'd only then, after a girlfriend or two, met the second wife, Margaret. And when I left Margaret after 5 years, I got on the train to Joburg and I met Carla. And I write in the book that on 3 or 4 occasions at Christmas, I would have all 3 wives and all the children for Christmas lunch. And people say, how did you do this? I said, I didn't do it. Carla said, you got to have the kids together. There was no animosity because none of them was guilty of stealing me away because they didn't. I left. I made my decisions. It's sad that I left, but the kids are grateful. They say, Dad, wow, you know, we wouldn't have moved around the country so much. We wouldn't have learned so much. None of them have got a university education, but only because we didn't have the money at all. And they've all excelled at what they do particularly well.
Okay, not to take sides, but it's not like you managed. It's because Carla gave you
Yes.
permission.
No, but I managed with her. She managed me managing the managing. Yeah, something like that.
Listen to the women in your lives. And I think as women, I think that's something we could learn from, and how to manage those kinds of situations. Because as a woman, my ego would say, bitches, children.
Say it.
You
Say
know?
it. Yeah, she didn't do that.
You know what I mean? Like, seriously, I mean, these are realities that I'm sure a lot of young people, and even, you know, people from older generations, the kind of conflicts that you experience, because I think not all of us come from families where you're the only child between your mother and your father. And when there are big family meetings, family gatherings, or important holidays, these kinds of conflicts tend to come to a head. So, you know, one thing I learned a lot by reading, by seeing Carla's, you know, the way that Carla approached, you know, the family dynamics, as well as your mother, in how to sort of rise above the tensions of the fact that this relationship with this mom ended, and now the situations like that, just how to manage those. I think it takes a lot of compassion, and again, sort of rising above your ego in order to do that. So please, word to the women in Mario's life. Got her.
And they were
Okay.
very nice. Yeah. Can I just say one little thing about Carla? When the first wife, Linda, I was already divorced from Margaret. I was living with Carla. When Linda divorced and she was with a guy in Harare, she was pregnant. She had nobody to come to. She got hold of my number from my mom in Cape Town. She was stranded, and I spoke to Carla, and Carla said, let's bring her down. She stayed with us. She was 3 months pregnant. When the baby was ready, me and my children's godfather, a guy, Abdul van der Rakis, and Carla and friends, we took her to Marymount. The baby was born, a little boy, and the nun came in and said, who's the father? And I kid you not, we all stood up. And she stayed for the next 18 months. Carla did the shopping, the cleaning, and I worked, they worked. But it was that kind of relationship. And after he was born, I said, what name is he going to take? Not the arsehole in Harare, do you want it? Or your own name? She said, no, Offizi, because the 2 boys, she and I took a bus down to Home Affairs in town when I was living here in Norwood. And we registered him as Kieran Offizi. And he is my son, whether it's blood or not. He's part of the family. And it was Carla who said, she could have said, I don't want your ex-wife staying here. I'll pay for the ticket, but...
And also something for you know, when talking about masculinity, that 3 men stood up and said that they're the fathers. That's amazing, you know, considering, hey, baby daddy stories. Well, it's time to open the conversation to the floor. But thank you so much for this.
I've run out of vodka.
Time for questions. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, I'm going to start with this young man. Oh, you've got, all right, great.
Thank you. My name